Today we speak with Shraman Jha, the Director of Communications and Marketing at World Wildlife Fund in India. So tune in and explore with us what inclusion may be in terms of biodiversity, but also from a perspective of changing sectors. I thought that your professional and personal story are really, really inspiring. And I thought that maybe our viewers and our listeners could actually learn from it and be inspired as well. You made some great changes in your life, going from corporate world to nonprofit. So I just wanted to ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right. So I've grown up as a boy in small town India. So I've loved my bicycle and the India of the 70s and the 80s were very different from the India that you see of today. But most of my higher education and thereafter I was in the metro cities like Delhi or Mumbai and so on. And I'd had a couple of stints overseas. You mentioned briefly in the preparation of this interview that you worked internationally. So before we start and to explore your, dedication to nonprofit and protection of wildlife and areas of climate, protection, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to tell us a little bit about your career that was amazing and international in the private sector, in the corporate sector. Life is full of surprises and coincidences. I had done my undergraduate studies in economics, and very logically, I had done between my 2 years of my management studies, my internship was also as a bank, and I'd studied finance, and the intent was clearly that I would probably go into a world of banking and finance. It so happened, again, some things which happens by chance, that the year 1992 saw one of the biggest financial scams of the century in India, where the entire financial systems, banking system, they largely were under severe stress. So when we were graduating from management school in early 93, there were very, very, very few finance jobs available. So by default, one became a marketeer. And it was important to get into a good organization. At that time, Unilever was still the most sought after organization. So since I got an offer with Unilever, I became a marketeer. So I served Unilever at that time was a different kind of an organization. There were multiple independent companies. It's not this one integrated monolith that it is today. Even in India, we had 4 large companies and a few small ones, each of them in different locations with their own philosophies. So as we lived through that, we saw a series of integrations and mergers and so on. There were 2 very large tea companies, and those of who are from tea lands, one was called Brook Bond, which is very large in UK, and say PG Tips is their brand, used to be their brand, for example. And the other was Lipton. Brook Bond was an old style tie wearing organization, and Lipton was a no tie organization. As part of these mergers, Brook Bond and Lipton merged. The biggest debate that was happening was, will the people from Lipton start wearing ties, or will the people from Brook Bond stop wearing ties? That was, I think, the biggest lunchroom discussion for a long period of time, more than any other thing that had got discussed. The other bit was, and since we were young sales managers leading teams in the field, we had salesmen who were 55 years old, and they would say, look, over 30 years, I've been told that the other brand is my enemy. And therefore, and we are better than that. And now today you want to go and ask me to sell that brand. Look, what face will we have in the marketplace? So those were some of the quirky experiences that we had. But I was not really a hardcore corporate in that sense. So along the side, I did my master's in econometrics. And for about some years, I served in the headquarters as a business economist. So I spent a lot of time
crunching data, running models and so on, which was very unusual for somebody who comes from a business background. And then I had a very phenomenal and a very interesting spell in a country that most people do not know much about, which is Bangladesh, which is right next to India, but in multiple ways, it had its own challenges and uniqueness. I came back to India. I came into a media company and traditional media company, and there were hopes of turning it around and so on, but there were fundamental issues. We get there. Then I got back into the international corporate sector with one of the large Dutch dairy organizations called Friesland Campina, and they have a $1 billion business in West Africa. So that's where I moved as their marketing director. Africa and West Africa is again a phenomenal experience. If you think you've seen India and you've seen it all, you still have to experience Africa to get a full. It was a fascinating experience. Then with some personal challenges, I got back into India, into a more traditional kind of a MNC environment again, doing some work quietly. But as the clock keeps on ticking, then you realize, look, there's one life to live. So you start scratching your head more and more. What would you rather do? And in the middle, I had by this time I'd seen most of the world. I'd traveled around. I'd even spent some time in say Saudi Arabia, and that was also a country in transformation. It was not so much what we've kind of heard about it, and you actually saw women colleagues, which was a new phenomenon which had come in there. So a lot of these experiences. But as you turn 50, you start getting reflective, and I guess that's really another point that you bring me to.
You made the change from corporate to nonprofit and dedicating yourself to the greater good in the year 2020.
I think it was probably a coincidence. But having said that, I'd already got engaged with the not-for-profits as through their boards. I'd been serving on a couple of boards for some years, so I'd got a good feel of what is the not-for-profit sector all about. And and a lot of things, because we only know about the sector we are in. We don't think much about the other sectors. And by that time, I realized, my God, they also have a lot of challenges. And one of which is that the resources you work with are a fraction of what a large for-profit organization works with. And yet, there are fairly large goals that you hope to deliver and the changes that you want to bring about. So I guess it all just started reaching to a tipping point where it all culminated. And I think it was just a sweet coincidence, that it kind of they're too synced at the point. It could have been a year less or a year more. I mean, it was not timed to that perfection.
You said that you served in several nonprofit boards while working in the corporate world. What led you to dedicate your time and interest?
The first one was serendipitous. We discovered that our organization was in some way a support to a particular charity organization globally, and we needed somebody to be represented on the India board. But it's only the moment I got into it and I started attending the meetings, and I did a couple of field trips to see what work they do in the field. And that is when you say, my God, I mean, what are we doing sitting in our fancy cabins and offices? This is where it's all happening. And I think that was really the tipping point. So when the second thing came across, and because then you realize that they're hungry, they need that support, they need that guidance, because a lot of things that you take for granted in the corporate sector is not automatically available in the not-for-profit profit sector. So even your perspectives, even how to kind of plan a particular thing, or there's so much of science which goes into it, and there's so much of it you can just pick up, adapt, and adopt. So that potential seemed boundless. So you saw a lot of passion, but every organization needs a certain bit of very mundane Excel-based core management kind of thing, which is not really the very the fancy passionate part, but it needs to be done. And we realize that that is a place where one can plug in and supplement these organizations so significantly and so well.
So basically, for you, it was a way to give back and invest in a sector that you believe needed support.
In a way,
Yes.
in a very significant way. And or from a more selfish perspective, you realize that it's a sector where you can serve out for maybe a good 10 years or 10 years or so, because if you're not the physically the fittest, or if there are other limitations, family constraints that you have, then the rigor of a regular corporate life is also something which not only starts becoming a little meaningless, but it's also something that may not be physically possible for you. So this gives you a nice blend of adequate challenges and a meaning.
This show is all about, the future and inclusion. And what I'm hearing from you is there is a possibility to think about inclusion through this point that you made. So do you see it the same way? Would you like to elaborate? Or?
Oh, absolutely, because at the outset, for anyone who's still in a corporate, I would urge you that you must give a certain part of your time and in some form support a not-for-profit. Either do something for them, serve on their board or serve on their committees. They need you. And a lot of things which you think is happens everywhere is not so easy. It could be a simple task like just a routine budgeting exercise, which every corporate under the sun does with so much rigor. But these are not how most of the not-for-profits are designed. They are not designed to generate and work for profit. So they need that help to be able to do that, so they can run the organizations well. The other very big significant shift that I've seen, Orna, is in my own sense of self-worth. That once you are representing a cause and once you are closely associated with a not-for-profit, I don't bat an eyelid now if I have to write to or pick up the phone and call up the biggest honchos in whichever field they may be. Because then you say, look, we are talking about the planet, we are talking about the environment, and are you on, or we need you to do this? So you can almost be a little almost demanding that, we need your support. So if it's something like a symbolic thing like an Earth hour, where you just switch off the lights for an hour once in a year, you can also say that I'd like you to put it out from your own Twitter handles and social media handles. Let it carry the weight. And you get that confidence that you are working for a bigger cause and a bigger good. So you can actually cut across hierarchy. You can cut across a lot of these things to get your messages across. It gives you a great feeling of mission, of a task. It's a big one.
Can you tell us your current title and the organization that you're dedicated to?
All right. So I am now with WWF India. WWF is known in most parts of the world, or was known in most parts of the world as a World Wildlife Fund. Though the name has changed some 40 years back, it's called the Worldwide Fund for Nature, because it has a much larger ambit now. But it's essentially WWF India. So our cause is fundamentally can be put into two brackets. One is conservation, and conservation can work into species, into forest land, into wetland, all those kind of the areas of conservation. And the other is promoting sustainability. These are the two big brackets. So just sustainable practices wherever we are, not for organizations, for people, for in every form. So it's a very wide canvas to kind of work on. And I serve them in the areas of fundraising, marketing, and communications. I'll just speak about each of these a little briefly. By definition, all these organizations are charities. They have to work on donations. And therefore, raising funds is probably the most vital and the most noble thing you can do, because if you do not have the funds, you cannot execute many of the things that you need to do so. there are different forms and strands of fundraising, and everything has to be made to work together. The marketing piece is quite simply, do people know the organization and the mission? So like any other marketing task, you have to make sure that people are very clear on who are you and why should you be supported. So that's a very clear marketing task. And the third bit is on communications, is if we have to reach out and get the message of conservation and sustainability across, that look, it matters to every one of us, whether we are overtly aware of it or we are not so overtly aware of it, then you have to communicate and communicate in multiple channels. Nobody is going to read a thick fat report except for a seminar. In today's world, it might be an Instagram post, it might be a Twitter, it might be in some different form, or it can be a video clip. So the entire gamut of communication possibilities to be able to reach from school children to senior mature adults, and also inanimate things like corporations, that's a fairly big task and mission on itself. So just to carrying the word out is a big one.
And could you tell us a little bit about your current work at this moment? Whether it changed due to COVID-19 crisis, and where is it evolving?
Yes, of course, things have changed. Because with the COVID-19 crisis, the first and foremost, everyone's concern is first on human health, and our task is that, yes, it's that human health cannot be seen in isolation. It is integrated with a lot of the environment that we are in. The communities who live and work around forests, their lives are interdependent with what is happening inside. So our messaging is very much on the integration of life, livelihoods, and nature, that you cannot break them up and compartmentalize it and just look at one particular point in time. So as an organization, we've been working directly with some emergency COVID relief. But I think the bigger thing is that, okay, COVID will come and go, but some of these scars it will leave behind. How do we rebuild in the medium term and the long term of human lives? And the fact that the human lives are integrated, that there are benefits, even if you're talking of things like a rhinoceros kind of thing, it has an indirect impact. The area of the concept of ecosystem, that everything affects everything else, is very vital. So you may be aware that just a week back was the World Environment Day, and the United Nations has declared this decade as the decade of ecosystem restoration. So it's about time that all of us realize that the interlinkages are very critical. You cannot just isolate one and that mankind is fine, but everything else can go to the dogs. It doesn't work that way. It's all very well knitted together. So the entire area of ecosystem restoration is one of our big challenges. To communicate the importance of an ecosystem is, both from a fundraising as from a marketing perspective, a very critical challenge. And post-COVID, it's important that people understand these interlinkages.
Since you went from one sector to another, what would be your message in terms of to your old sector, and in terms of bringing the sectors together, perhaps?
My own learning has been that they are not as widely different as we may want to seem. It's just the framing of the context which is different. Just like you have a particular objective in any business, whether it's of market share or a profit or of revenue. Similarly, there are broad objectives that any of the social sector organizations also have. And to achieve those objectives, there are certain set of strategies which back them up. The practicality of revenue to support the task that you need to do remains there. It's there in both the cases. Many of the skills are transferable. What you need to adapt for is fundamentally the passion of the people you work with. Most of the people who are in the not-for-profit sector are not there for any logical way that it's kind of great to have, you'll never have the same lifestyle that you can afford for in the for-profit sector, but they are there for their passion and their love. So when you interact and you work with them, you really figure that out, that this is a breed slightly different from those of us who have worked in the profit sector, where many of us might be actually be employer agnostic at some stage or the other. Here, people are not cause agnostic. They are actually very married and wedded to the cause. So when you just deal with them and interact with them, it makes the world of a difference.
Lots of businesses at this moment are talking about inclusive growth post-COVID-19. I mean, that is something that was launched here in Paris with the President Macron. But to what extent is this, reality really, in the corporate sector, and to what extent, this sector is in fact moving toward this, kind of inclusive growth, inclusive urban futures, let's say, and what can you teach them from your perspective? What is it still that is missing in that, in that sector to actually, and in long-term move toward this idea of inclusive growth?
These realization that that you can't be in work in isolation. The realization that you can't be happy and prosperous unless the environment around you is blossoming as well. I think that has hit people very, very hard. I think we've all seen visuals that in the lockdown there have been animals roaming the street. The skies have been bluer than people have ever seen. In India, people have been able to see glittering Himalayas hundreds of miles away, which people have not, they say they have not seen in 50 years or 60 years. It's almost 2 generations have not seen that. And today, because the skies are so clear, you can see the mountains glittering away in the background. Once people have realized that it is possible, I think that's been a very, very, very big shift and in terms of understanding. The other side has been, I think we've also all understood the importance of minimalism in some form or the other. That all of us, when we've locked in at home, we discovered that, yeah, you get along just fine. Maybe we didn't need as many things as we all had because our ways of life have been different. So I think the people on the other side, what they've realized is that they can't, for their businesses or their environments to be happy, it's equally environment that the rest of the world is taken along. Otherwise, it'll be a Pyrrhic victory. Very soon you'll realize that everything will crumble. So it's not worth it. I think that understanding has come across loud and clear. And to that extent, I think the COVID crisis has been perhaps a blessing for this sector.
I would completely agree with you. I think I would definitely, kind of support your point that, simplification actually, it made us, the crisis made us, I would think, appreciate small things in life. And that has been a blessing as well, that you all of a sudden could be happy about small things. You don't have to wait for the, huge thing to happen. I mean, just listening to your, this description of view of Himalayas that people didn't see for 50 years is inspiring enough, I would think. What would be your recommendations from your perspective now, working for the nonprofit sector and also protecting the wildlife and biodiversity to the political arena?
See, the political arena is not divorced of the importance of particularly of environment and so on. And we do believe that politicians, whether they are in government or in the opposition, are also a very important set of stakeholders. At the end of the day, they have a voice, and their voice that people listen to. So we would want to have them on board as well, whichever side of the political spectrum they are, because at the end of the day, what they are talking about is good for the environment. If it's good for the environment, it's good for mankind. And I think we are fortunate that we actually get support from different types of politicians. We write, India is a large country, it's a federal structure. So we have, we have chief ministers in the states, and then we have the national government and so on. So every year on certain key dates, such as Earth Hour, we actually write formal letters to them requesting for support. And you'll be surprised at how much support we actually get. That means people do get it, that it makes a difference, and their symbolic acts can also make a difference into how things happen. We also understand that there are other thoughts and other compulsions. So it's all about finding and striking a balance that is workable. But the ability to stay engaged in conversations with the political class is very important. You cannot ignore them. It's very easy for people to often say that, oh, politicians don't care. It's not. Politicians do care, and do care because it's also their self-interest, because at the end of the day, people will support them if they believe that their greater good is being taken care of. So it goes into a slightly complex part. But we certainly work very hard to also try to include everyone, including the political class, in dialogue. They may not always agree with what you have to say, but it's important that they hear you out, and that's the best way forward. And if you get their endorsement, it can be a very strong endorsement in terms of making significant changes going forward.
Inclusion has been widely discussed as aspiration in these days in business and in corporate world and policy and political cycles, especially now in the view of COVID-19. So I just wanted to know, what does inclusive future or integrated environment or inclusive recovery mean to you? If you would recommend us, what would be your perspective, or what could be done for this to happen better? But primarily, I'm interested for the first part. What kind of images it brings to you, inclusive future or inclusive recovery?
It reminds me of a soft drink jingle of some 20, 30 years back. It used to have a line saying, "We are in it together for the fun of it." We are in it together for the fun of it. Because regardless of whether you want to be inclusive or you don't want to be inclusive, the question is, you have no choice. I mean, the planet is for all, and we are going to, whether we like each other or we don't like each other, we are all going to live on the planet for our lives. So and therefore it's in everyone's best interest to realize that this is an inescapable fact, and each one has a particular role to play. And I mean, when we spoke about species, we just talk about this biodiversity and ecosystem, but even among mankind, different people, we all have specific roles to kind of play in whichever way we tend to work. And the moment we can build that little bit of a respect and understanding for what the other folks do, I just think the world is automatically a better place. There might be people you'd never, if you've not had, for example, a medical problem of a particular kind, you will not even know the name of the specialist doctor who deals with that. But if you have a medical problem of a particular kind, you'll immediately figure out that there are 10 people who you never know what exactly they were or their specialization was, but today you need it, you become aware of it. So a lot of the awareness doesn't happen till it bites. And that is really when it kind of comes home to roost. In one of my corporate adventures, I worked with what is the animal health sector. And that is when I encountered a lot of vets. To my untrained mind till that time, whenever you thought of vets, you thought of vets which kind of took cared for your pets and those kind of things. But then you realize that 90% of the vets are actually directly or indirectly involved in the food chain, which impact you and me. Whether it is dairy, it is meat, it is poultry and eggs, or which any of these forms that come in, then you realize that how intrinsically our lives are. The food that we eat is linked to the health of the animal, which is linked to the vet, which we often don't think about. So much of this awareness is sometimes is just circumstantial, and when we are tossed into peculiar situations, we see the immense amount of contribution that each side makes into some day-to-day things that we do, which we may not even be aware of. I think the one message that I want to kind of put across is that we have now experienced things as they were some time back, and we realize that we are actually better off for it. It sounds very silly, but thanks to COVID and all the safety measures, air conditioning systems at offices are not on. So we are back to keeping wide open windows, fans, ceiling fans. And India is by and large is a warm country, but nobody feels as hot or as miserable as we thought when we stepped out of an air-conditioned room into the heat outside and say, "My God, it's so hot." Today we just somehow appreciate the trees outside, the birds chirping. We hear them, which in an air-conditioned closed thing, you never felt that.
Mm.
So as you look at your urban life, just see that even there's so much to be appreciated that was always there. Just take that time and the moment to soak it in and take the joys and pleasures of what is around you.
Mm.
I have never been much of a birdman, but just working with people whose passion is in birds, I now know the names of some about 20 odd birds which were always there on the trees outside, but I'd never given them a second look and I'd never realized the difference between one or two of them. So if you give respect or interest to some of the other lines and professions put together, there's so much of fun that you can have, so much of interesting things that you can do without changing anything very fundamental in what you and I are otherwise doing. And that can make, I think, all of us in a happier place. We can feel better, we can feel more cheerful as we tide through these tough times. And like all tough times, sooner or later, these tough times will also come to an end. But we might just have refreshed our own thoughts, feelings, and realize that there are just slight modifications which can make a very big difference to our day-to-day happiness.
Well, that is absolutely wonderful. So I would just like to thank you very much for your time and this wonderful, ideas that you shared with us and inspiration. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Orna. It's entirely a pleasure.
You were listening to the podcast Inclusive Urban Futures with Orna Rosenfeld. Please stay tuned for the next episode.